everyone, welcome and thank you for joining me today as we talk about one of the three forbidden topics: sex, money, and death. Yes, today our topic is death. What better time to talk about death than today in 2020 when we have lost over 1 million people, 1 million lives to COVID 19? Many of us have been left grief stricken, many others with the survivor's guilt, and many other families are in this fear, in this deep fear of contracting this spontaneous disease, and which is so close to death. I want to quote Norman Cousins here. Death is not the greatest loss in life. The greatest loss is what dies while we're still alive. So I want to say that again. Death is not the greatest loss in life. The greatest loss is what dies within us while we're still alive. That is so profound to meditate on. Share with you on what I've learned about death, both from my personal experiences as well as working with many people very intimately in my therapy room. The subject of death is vast and massive. And today, let's contain it to only about the conversations that we can have around death. For some of us, the story of death is of our love stories. For others, it is the lives of our loved ones. Death is the story of one's life, and for the other, it is the story of one's loss. Death is the story of one's life, and for others, death is the story of one's loss. So the best way to put it is, death is the story of our lives. Talking about death does not come naturally, just as we don't talk about sex, money. Talking about death is never natural. We're so used to talking about how we want to live, what are our dreams, what are our goals, but we never talk about how we want to die. A few days ago, when I was asked this question on how I want to die, I was taken aback. I did not have any answer. I felt like I did not have any control. But stepping back and reflecting, I became aware that yes, I do have a control of how I can die. Do I want to have a degraded death, or do I want to have a dignified death? I do have control. Having this conversation with many of my clients, for some, death has been so close. It has been a near-death experience. For others, it has been an experience of nurturing their loved ones in their arms as they left their last breath. Few others witnessing the slow death, slow death, breath by breath of their suffering parent. For others, families who have been murdered because of political violence. And for many others, having successions of multiple losses hitting them one after the other. So talking to so many people, there is a clear distinction that I recognize. How some of us live in a deep acceptance, while others in denial. Now, let me use my story as an example. I grew up with survivor's guilt and shame around death. I missed the last chance to say goodbye to my mother at age 7. In my case, I internalized death and maintained an absolute silence around death. I never spoke about it or I never discussed it. I kept that in absolute silence because I did not want to re-traumatize my parents. Secondly, I believe that talking about it will only invite more of it in my life. Yes, what a grandiose idea I had. The avoidance of death leaves us so unprepared for death itself. I've noticed this clear distinction between surviving the face of death and not merely just surviving death, but thriving and claiming to be alive at the face of death. And this became the foundation of my work, the foundation of my work that I do with couples, with families, individuals with erotic energy. So I want to repeat myself here. There is a clear distinction between surviving the face of death and not merely surviving the face of death, but being alive and thriving and claiming to be alive is what the distinction is. And that is what makes the foundation of my work, whether it is work with clients, with families, with individuals, or with erotic energy in itself. When your focus is to survive, you're closed and you're in a state of contraction. You're not trusting, you're afraid. You don't want to take any chances or risks. You want to make sure that you don't get hurt again or you don't get hit again. You live in, your body is closed and it's contracted. And most of us, you can see people who have this body language of crunching because they want to protect themselves from being attacked. But when you're alive and you claim that death has showed you how precious life is, death becomes more meaningful to you and it's more accepting. You should know that surviving death at its face and being alive at the face of death are both very much interconnected. For some of us, it is the survivor's guilt of why am I alive and why not my mother? And for others, it is, I am here and I better do something about it. I better honor you and my life and live the life for both of us in such a meaningful way. I want to take a moment here and I want to invite you to dialogue with me. You can either type it down in your chat boxes or you could take your journal and write it down. I want you to ask yourself this. When I think of death, I think of dash. So when I think of death, I think of dash. So you can write about all the memories, all the words, the names, anything, images that come into your mind when you say, when I think of death, I think of. I'll give you a few minutes here. And maybe I'm just going to read all the chat messages. There are a lot of you sending me messages. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. And I want you to complete it saying, and I feel. So when I think of death, I think of dash and I feel dash. Like, what do you feel? There's so many emotions tied to death. So what is it that you feel? Okay, here are some of the answers that I would like to read for you. When I think of death, I think of love and I feel comfort. I have lost my husband and my parents in the last 4 years. I nurtured my husband to the end, so I have much dignity and peacefulness. Oh, thank you so much for sharing. That is so beautiful. I love the word dignity and peacefulness. Thank you. Here's another reply that I got. A man who has lived fully is prepared to die. Oh my, that makes, I love that. A man who has lived fully is prepared to die. I have another reply. I have many, many replies. I don't have the time to read every one of them right now, but I look forward to reading each and every response at the end of the session. But there's the last one that I would like to read. When I think of death, I think of my grandmother and I feel very peaceful. That is beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Now, coming back to my own example of living in denial and moving to acceptance, I had to constantly keep reminding myself and that talking about death is talking about life. And the way you talk about death talks a lot about the way you want to live life. And this has helped me change my relationship with death, with my family, and with my work that I do. What I want to highlight here is the inevitability of death and how it clashes with our values of mastery. We are constantly talking about mastering things in life, but none of us has the mastery over death. We can only prepare for death, and preparing for death is in engaging in practices and rituals, either monthly, yearly, or spiritually. Like death is a very participatory ritual in my Indian culture, meaning you don't you don't just sit down and grieve, but you perform rituals, you engage fully you with the grieving, you dance, you sing, you eat together with the grieving family. It is an expressive communal, which means you grieve in the presence of others, you cry, you yell, you howl, you let your physical body, you let all the emotions pour out of your physical body. And what makes it more powerful is the image of the dead person, along with all the prayers and intentions of that the living people bring together, brings about so much of healing energy into the death and into the grieving process. And I want you to tell me something about grief. Yes, you can type about it, or you can write about it, journal about it. Tell me, what is the conversation that you need to be having with yourself, with your families, with your loved and dear ones? What is the conversation you need to be having about death today? I also want you to reflect on how you want to experience your death. Do you want to experience it in a dignified way by living truly and freely? Or do you want to experience it in a deteriorating way by living your life in fear and with regrets while you're alive? That is a choice. That is a question I want to leave you with.